Welcome to the Business Resilience Decoded podcast, brought to you by Escalate Advisors and the Disaster Recovery Journal. Crisis management in today's world is ever-changing, and this podcast is our commitment to help you navigate successful outcomes for any crisis you may face. I'm your host, Vanessa Matthews. I specialize in providing insights and solutions for crisis, continuity, and resilience across industries from real estate and healthcare to terrorism in the airline and transportation worlds. No matter what industry you're in, this podcast will provide you the tools to build resilience in your organization. Welcome back to another episode of the Business Resilience Decoded podcast. I'm your host, Vanessa Matthews. So excited to be back with you guys in 2023. Today's podcast episode is titled Business Continuity Risks to Watch in 2023. So you might have heard that business continuity plans drawn up for the usual everyday business risks are always going on. But every year there are specific threats that we need to consider based on the political climate, the economy, global conflicts, you have it. So in this episode, we're going to share the top risks that we're seeing at the beginning of 2023 that you need to consider this year. We will also link the sources for this episode in the show notes so you can leverage this data as you see fit. So the first big risk that we're seeing is global inflation. Last year in the United States, we saw inflation heavily impact gas prices, grocery prices, and more everyday items. Businesses need to consider how rising costs will intersect with supply chain issues and how that will continue to impact the bottom line of your business. Additionally, from a labor perspective, every employee wants more money, more money, more money. And so as you think about the cost of inflation, what does that do to your talent and to the capability that you're going to have to put in place to maintain and retain your workforce? The second big risk that we're paying attention to is Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. We expect this to continue having an impact on oil and gas prices as well as availability. But also there's a big threat on the global hunger and food supply chains, as Ukraine is one of the largest global wheat producers in the United States, in the world. There's a lot of discussion happening around artificial intelligence. This is our third risk that we are watching, and its impact on various industries. In 2023, we've reached a point where AI is actually good. There are fewer and fewer errors in AI-generated content, and it's getting more and more difficult to distinguish between what was created by a person and what was created by a computer. Just recently, my team introduced to me a website where you can go in there and say what you want it to produce, and it will literally write a whole plan or a whole article. And so I typed in business continuity plan for healthcare company, and it wrote me 3 or 4 pages on a healthcare company's business continuity plan. And so as you think about that, the question we have for you is, how is your organization assessing the risks and potential benefits of using artificial intelligence? Love to hear your thoughts on that. The fourth risk that we're watching is the looming conflict between China and Taiwan, which is a big threat to the United States. China threatens to invade Taiwan for the economic power that would come from acquiring the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. Politico also notes that TSMC, the semiconductor manufacturing company, produces 92% of the world's high-end semiconductors, which are used in everything from iPhones to military planes. A recent war game suggested if China invaded Taiwan, it would fail and incur a huge cost to the US as an ally of neighboring Asian countries, which this is a big deal that we're seeing. We just hosted, for Escalate Advisors, we hosted a executive roundtable in Charlotte with our clients and some business leaders across the community. And one of the top risks that we've been talking about are geopolitical threats. And the real conversation that I think we really need to be having as a country is, what are we going to stand for? The question of our democracy is literally a big topic of conversation, and it's going to continuously becomes something that we're going to have to pay attention to, especially with 2024 elections. And so as we think about what's happening across the globe, we need leaders that are going to stand up and fight for democracy and not allow some of the things that we're seeing across the world, like Russia's war in Ukraine. right? And so these are things that I think are really big deals for organizations to make sure that we are paying attention to. And as business continuity leaders, raise the visibility of this risk and of this threat in the meetings that you're in. Finally, the fifth thing that we are talking about this year in terms of risks are the need to plan for compounding risks is more important than ever. Forbes gives the examples of Hurricane Laura in August 2020, forcing residents in Louisiana to evacuate their homes. But normal shelters were not an option because that so many people could not safely gather in one place during a pandemic. So evacuees did not have another easily accessible option for shelter. And so as we think about all of the 4 risks that I talked about, if we talk about number 5 and what happens when the next disruption or the next hurricane or the next fire happens, we already have a housing crisis in most cities across the United States and across the globe. Can we imagine what a big disaster would do, not only from a housing perspective, but a food perspective, and how that impacts the local economies that we all live in? So as always, you can expect to keep hearing overviews of the most relevant and timely topics in business resilience on our podcast. Make sure you subscribe to get notified when we release new episodes. We're also looking forward to hosting more guests this year that can lend their expertise on the show. If you know someone who might be interested in speaking to the biggest trends in resilience over the next few years, please apply at the link in our show notes. You can also check the show notes for the links that we talked about today. And again, look out for future episodes. Thank you for listening to the Business Resilience Decoded podcast, brought to you by Asfalis Advisors and Disaster Recovery Journal. Make sure you check out the show notes for this episode to see all the upcoming events, programs, and ways we can support you. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, leave us a review, and share it with a friend. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.